Hello, welcome to Off-Nominal.
Hello.
That got very dark there, like the way that music,
Yeah.
real spooky start to the show there.
Foreboding.
How's it going, Jake? Are you creeped out by our intro?
Yeah, I'm like a little like, what are we going to talk about today?
I tried to hit
was
the music
teasing this
loop.
is going to be like, I was teasing this is going to be like maybe a little bit of a scary show just by the nature of our subject matter. But
I tried to hit the music loop at a different point in time each day so that it is different, right? I don't want to show up at the same time every day, hit play, and it's the same song at the start. So I apparently nailed it for the spookiness, because we're here with Brian Weeden of the Secure World Foundation. How is it going, sir?
It is going great. Happy Thursday, everybody.
It's a chill week for you, I'm sure. There's very little topical stuff going on in your world.
Actually, so I was traveling last week in Europe, and I came home on Saturday with a little present, as in COVID. So it's been an interesting start to the week, but it ended up being a very mild case. So I didn't have to see anybody. I got to stay home all week. It was great. Get a lot of work done. It was pretty useful.
That's that imported
exactly,
European COVID too.
yeah, it's a good vintage.
Well, you decided to come here and drink a beer with us and talk about all sorts of topics that Jake's very curious about. So you must be feeling all right. What is that you're drinking over there?
So this is from a local brewery here in Silver Spring, Maryland, called Astrolab, and it's one of their seasonals. It's called the Irish Goodbye, and it's sort of a riff on a Guinness. Fairly tasty.
Nice. I'm trying to come up with an Irish Goodbye joke, but I wasn't fast enough. I got my 23andMe says I can make those jokes. It's fine.
Yeah, you're good. I'm like 0.1% Italian, I think, as a mindset. So is that enough or no?
No, especially not for Irish jokes.
Yeah. Oh, I got lots of Irish jokes. I get that. Okay.
On that topic, I have
the problem.
Yeah.
I've got a thing from Dock Street Brewing that's called a Futura. It is an Italian Pilsner with this sweet futurist-looking car on it. I've been watching the Giro d'Italia this week, so I'm feeling like this was the right choice for me. My camera will focus. There we go. It's pretty tasty. It's very refreshing.
Yeah?
It's Pilsner season.
I have.
I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed a lot of my hardcore beer friends have gone full circle from like the hoppiest, maltiest thing you can get to like the clear, light, refreshing pilsners. And I don't know if it's just kind of the circle of life or what,
definitely.
but they seem to be
That's
a new thing out there. Right?
They're gonna try seltzer for a day and then bail out on that and then go back.
Yeah. No, it's definitely like the trend really, it's like the whole like low-waisted and high-waisted jeans thing. It just like overnight, it just like changed and everyone's like, no, I don't want any more IPAs. But speaking of IPAs.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what you got?
So I found a new space-themed brewery. So it's in Monterey. And so it's called, what the hell's the brewery called? Principia, I guess. So this is Spectra India Pale Ale. It's got a really nice label. And then I have a backup one here, which is, I guess that's the name of the thing, Principia. So
they just name it all the same. Yeah,
I can't. Mathematica? Who knows, man? But they got cool labels. And there was like 10 of them. This is all, the beer store had all these things. So it was like pretty cool.
Were you there recently? Did you take a trip recently?
I did, yeah.
Nice.
So you realize that's an Isaac Newton reference, right? Principia Mathematica, right?
Yeah. Newton reference,
Yeah.
But he just can't really read today, so that's the main problem with Jake.
No, I can't tell what's the brewery name and what's the beer name, and I thought it was because the other one says Principia too, but I'm like, okay, so is that the brewery because they both say that? But then the other one, but one doesn't even have other names. So anyway, this is where we're at with this episode so far. We're really good.
It's off to a great start.
And I did a very, very poor.
Oh my God. You can't read, you can't pour. But what you can do, Jake, is be still a citizen of a country that recently, to the world's relief, joined the U.S. in an anti-satellite test ban. The whole world is like, thank God Canada went in on this with us.
Yeah, I laughed at that too. It's like, yeah, we're gonna not blow up any more satellites. I was like, well, hang on, were we?
They're like
were
the
we thinking
one
of that?
country that
Or-
got a satellite that landed on them, and there was like a whole international incident that satellite crashed into Canada. So it's
They're
a little
sensitive about that.
yeah. Them in Australia, like it's a shocker that Australia has not instituted some like space station deorbiting ban. You know, like that's they are just barely missing all those. But anyway, should we start here? This was I feel like Brian, you were on Miko a couple of months ago, probably in the run up to, you know, right after the Russian incident. We kind of had a sense that, you know, and you obviously have been working in this direction for a long time through all the things that you're doing. So the vice president coming out and announcing the U.S. is instituting a self ban on these direct ascent tests. How did you take that news? How do you think that plays into the overall picture of things that is unfolding right now?
Well, I mean, it was something that's been in the discussion for a while. It didn't just happen overnight, right? And honestly, it's something that really kind of percolated up from within the Department of Defense and from within sort of the parts of the government that use space. And my sense is that it was driven by a couple of things. One was, you know, we had just, you know, last November, Russia tested an ASAT weapon, blew up a satellite, created a whole bunch of debris, created some problems for the International Space Station. Just a couple of years ago, India tested an ASAT weapon and blew up a satellite. And a few years, several years before that, everyone kind of remembers the 2007 Chinese ASAT test, blew up a satellite, created a bunch of debris. And my sense
that
is
one
the US
time
government-
that the U.S. used it because it was definitely a necessary situation that was
Well, yeah,
threatening them.
right. You know, 2008, we followed the Chinese, and it was completely for safety purposes.
Totally.
Obviously,
Yeah.
you know, nothing else going on.
Sometimes I like to
So-
drive my car 100 miles an hour just to see that it can if I need to do it, you know?
Right,
In case
right.
I need to escape some situation, I need to go 100.
An engine
Sometimes
check,
I like
right?
to do it.
You know, yeah, just making sure. Yeah. So I think the sense was, you know, looking, you know, talking to around the building, you know, are we ever going to do this? Probably not, right? Because, you know, we made a big fuss when people did that. It was a bad thing. It created a lot of debris. So it's probably something America's not going to do. And if we're not going to do it, there's no real advantage to it. Then why don't we put some pressure on the countries that are doing it and say, look, we're going to say we're not going to do this. We think this is what's responsible to do. Who's willing to say along with us, right? And to me, it was sort of along, you know, along the same lines of the nuclear testing. You know, in the 50s and 60s, we were blowing up a lot of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere. And then after a while, we realized, you know what, that's maybe not the best idea in the world. It harms us. It harms everyone. We're probably not going to do that anymore. And eventually, the Soviets decided, yeah, that's probably a bad idea. And now we have a global ban on that, right? That's sort of where we got to. And also, I think it's important to point out that, you know, this is not a ban on all kinds of space weapons and use in testing. It just talks about a specific type that creates a lot of debris that lasts for a long time and poses a problem. The United States is not disarming itself. It's not unilaterally, you know, saying, you know, we're weak, come attack us. In fact, part of the reason the military felt it could back this was they have lots of other ways to achieve their objectives that don't involve blowing up a satellite, creating lots of space debris. So, you know, it was something that we had kind of, you know, we thought was in the works for a while. It's an idea that's been around for a while, and we were pretty thankful the U.S. had kind of came out and said it. The question is, what comes next, right? And we're sort of joking about, you know, Canada's pledge. You know, while we were joking about that, that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for who else is willing to go out there and say, yeah, we agree. We think this is not a responsible thing to do anymore. There's a big meeting going on in Geneva this week talking about space security between a whole lot of countries. There have actually been, you know, a dozen or so countries that may not have made explicit policy statements, but have voiced support for it and said they're working on something similar for themselves. So the hope is, you know, we'll kind of have everyone sort of agree that's an irresponsible thing to do, and then maybe we'll actually, you know, get some legally binding teeth behind this eventually. One hopes.
Okay. So here's my big question, and this is like, it's probably a cynical outlook, but I don't know. There's a lot of cynicism required in this stuff, I think. But how actually, impactful is this going to be? Because so you mentioned, well, there needs to be more legally binding stuff behind it, but that's fine. But the other thing was that, it just bans the test of this one kind of weapon. So you can still use these weapons operationally, I guess. You just can't test them. So there's that. And then the whole timing of this is obviously very non-coincidental, right? So we have this Russian test at the end of last year, right? Which was, I think to me, it sounds like it was putting something on record that said, hey, we can do this, as they prepared to go into Ukraine. And then the ASAT test happening right after Ukraine, or the ASAT test ban happening right after Ukraine. Is this more about the posturing of getting, the groups of countries against each other than it is actually about preventing debris in space?
So as far as the timing of this announcement, my sense, it was much more linked to this big UN meeting than it was specifically linked to Ukraine.
Really?
Just
timeline-wise, I feel like that's a necessity, right? There's a reason that all the other countries are saying we're working on it, because it takes a while.
It's exactly. Outside of certain recent presidents who just announced stuff, most governments have formal processes where they go through, where they have the National Security Council or the National Space Council or the Homeland Security Council, right? They meet for weeks and months, and they bring together all the different departments and agencies, and they kind of hash something out, and then they present something to the president to sign. That's normally how this stuff kind of works, and most decisions are an output of that process, or not just announced at the drop of a hat, right? Another great example of this is the Artemis Accords, right? We've seen over the last couple of years kind of a steady, every few months another country joins on. A lot of that is because it takes months for that government to kind of get its own house in order, and then it enters in negotiations with the United States government, because while there's a kind of a part of the accords that are the common principles for everyone, there's another piece which is sort of the bilateral, what are they going to be contributing to Artemis? What are they getting exchanged? That all that stuff. So all that's got to be worked out. That can take months. So when you're seeing these public announcements, that's just kind of the tip of the diplomatic iceberg, if you want to put it that way. So in this case, the announcement, I mean, I'm sure there was probably a little bit of we want to make a point about Russia here. But I think it was more driven by this meeting going on in Geneva that is explicitly talking about space security and what to do about threats to space, and the U.S. wanting to kind of get a position out ahead of that. Now, as far as the timing of the Russian ASAT test, this was the 11th or 12th test of this system since 2014 or so. So it's not like they just did it out of the blue, and it's sort of just the latest in a series of tests, each one kind of building on the other. So I mean, it's certainly possible that they timed it to send a signal ahead of the invasion of Ukraine. But I think there's two things working against that. One is, again, this just sort of the next test in the series. And two, they didn't actually, they've actually used any of those weapons in Ukraine, right? Except they've all these satellites, from NATO and other countries that are flying overhead and taking pictures and causing a lot of problems for Russia.
Finding large ships occasionally.
Exactly, right? Helping them target, helping Ukraine target actual, assets to go kill Russians. And so if it was a warning, then it kind of backfired on them, right? Because they're not actually using those weapons, in part because they wouldn't really have much of an effect. And I say that because the satellites that are being used, like commercial imagery and stuff, there's lots of them, right? So firing a missile to go take out one of them, you need to do that dozens and dozens and dozens of times to have any kind of a real effect.
Yeah. You can take out a nice keyhole satellite, but
right.
Try to hit every planet. Planet doesn't even know where all their satellites are. So how do you?
I hope they know where all their satellites are. Right?
I mean, roughly, general
let
sense.
Alone the more than 2,000 Starlinks that are providing coverage, right? So this gets to another thing we've been talking about in our world, and that is this concept of resilience, right? So how does the U.S. protect its space capabilities against attacks. One way is to make them more resilient, i.e., make it so that if you blow up a couple of satellites, it's not going to be that big of a deal. You're going to have a way for the system to degrade gracefully. And as you pointed out, the way you don't do that is by having 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 very expensive sitting ducks that you can't replace. That is what you don't do, right? You go to this distributed model. You go to a model where you have lots of other backups, and that's how you deter these kinds of attacks, because they're just pointless, right? They don't have any real military effect.
That would be an interesting thing. So, like, it is weird to consider 10 years ago how different this conversation would be, because there wasn't this huge number of satellites that give you reasonable enough data. But there's still, like, after the ASAT test originally, there was that offhanded comment that I forget who it was in the Russian government. It was like, we could take out every GPS satellite, like, which is just typical bluster. But I mean, that would be the one that is numerically possible. Like, there's 20, 30 some, right? Not
really, right? Because you're right. There's about a little more than 30 GPS satellites, but there's been an agreement in place for more than a decade now for all of the GNSS constellations to all broadcast the same civil signal, right? So
Galileo,
those satellites broadcast multiple signals, right? They broadcast GPS broadcasts 5 different signals. 2 of them are military generally, and 3 of them are for civil use. And you're right. So Galileo and Weeden and GPS all are moving towards broadcasting a common civil signal, which means if you take out all 30 GPS satellites, you and I would probably be okay once we get to that phase, right? Because our phones aren't going to really notice. U.S. military is in a bit of a hole, right? Because they're the ones that are using that dedicated military signal. But the Russians, as we've seen, are using GPS, right? There's all these reports of commercial old school Garmin receivers, duct taped to the consoles of tanks and planes and stuff. And
they're all like recording on Strava as they drive their tanks around.
Right. So, again, I the question is why, if they could have and it be such hugely impactful, why haven't they? Well, that suggests something is not right in that calculus, right? Either maybe they can't, or maybe they decided, it's not worth it, because starting blowing up GPS satellites, that would be an attack on the U.S. That would be an attack on NATO. They've suddenly just opened up this door that although they made a lot of noise about, Russians really don't want to open that door.
Yeah, the effect that would have on the war is they would lose immediately. Yeah. Instead of very slowly, like that, it's an accelerant.
I mean, let's not kid around. I mean, it's going to be bad for everybody, right? Because now we're talking about, armed warfare between NATO and Russia. Nuclear weapons are now in play. Tactical nukes are in play. That's a really big deal. But you're right. They're struggling just to kind of get some minimal gains against Ukraine, let alone the combined forces of NATO.
Yeah, yeah, it's not really a fair fight, as we've seen. Okay. Yeah, so as I suspected, there's a lot more to this than just my read of the space news articles.
Yeah, what we are seeing them use space weapons, right? We're seeing them use cyber weapons against space assets, and we're seeing them use electronic warfare, i.e. jamming. So the day of the start of this latest phase of the Russian invasion, because remember, the Russians actually invaded Ukraine in 2014, right, when they also annexed Crimea. So the day of the latest, re-invasion, there's a commercial SATCOM company called Viasat, and they had thousands of their customers in Europe lose access. The modems went offline. And it turns out somebody hacked into the terrestrial ground network and used that to upload a malicious set of firmware to all of these modems in Europe that bricked the modems. So that's kind of a space weapon in the sense that, you just took this space service offline. The satellite is perfectly fine. It's flying around, no problems. But the people that actually need to use it in Europe, including potentially Ukrainian government, Ukrainian military, can't use it. So that is what we're seeing happen. And there's also a bunch of jamming of GPS and jamming of SATCOM that's going on. We saw the Russians are pretty good at that. We saw a lot of that in Syria. We saw a lot of that in other parts of Ukraine since 2014. It's relatively easy to do, at least for the civil signals. The military signal is a little bit more difficult, but for the civil signals, it's relatively easy to do. Now, even that, though, we have not seen the degree of electronic warfare that a lot of us had suspected. And that, again, might be because the Russians are having to use the Ukrainian cell phone network, the Ukrainian, or GPS itself, right? So maybe they don't want to totally take it out because they have to use it, unfortunately.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a lot cheaper to do it that way than it is to blow the satellite up, I
right?
guess, right?
That's exactly the point, right? We put out this annual report on global counterspace, and while everyone kind of focuses on the big flashy things like blowing up satellites and high-powered lasers and all that kind of stuff, the militaries are going to use what is cheapest and most effective. And oftentimes that is, a lot less tech, a lot lower tech, or a lot, less flashy than what most people might think is going to be out there, right?
Yeah, how do we find Osama bin Laden? Talk to the guy who took his laundry out or whatever it was. It's like,
well, we tried that. We tried a lot of that, right? Yeah.
Huh.
The Starlink situation, there's a lot of hype around it because it gets clinks because you can put Elon Musk in your headline and that's super great and all that.
Yep.
Have you been following that storyline and especially everyone always gives me crap because I say Viasat and you said Viasat, which makes me feel like I should say Viasat, and now it's in my brain.
I think it's Viasat.
I think everyone tells me it is, but I can't make my brain work that way. But in the wake of that, I saw some talk that Starlink was being used for some sort of fire control systems. Is that some hyped up stuff? Do you know anything about that side of the story there?
So, let's back up a second, just kind of give an overview of what's happened here, right? So, Starlink has a constellation of more than 2,000 satellites in low Earth orbit that are just orbiting around the world. And if you can pull up one of those, there's a whole bunch of Starlink tracker sites. You can pull up one of those that might be an interesting.
Looks like Starlink.
I got it. This .sx.
Yeah, great.
That's the one.
Yeah. So the satellites are flying around the world, right? Now, in order to provide service in a country, they've got to have two things. They've got to have a ground station that can provide coverage for that country, and then they have to have permission from that government in order to actually broadcast signals, what they call a market access license. So for the last few years, Starlink has been going around and negotiating all those agreements, as well as putting in place all of these ground stations. And the ground stations are there because when the satellite comes overhead and you send packets up to the satellite relays the packets to the ground station, which then connects them to the internet. And then when the packets come back, the ground station goes back up to the satellite and back down, right? That's how the whole system is sort of working. And so when it comes to Ukraine, Starlink had been talking with the Ukrainian government about licensing the market access license for a while, but hadn't finished that. And then at some point very early in the war, the government made, it was a public tweet or something saying, we want Starlink. And next thing you know, Elon's like, it's on the way, right? And there's photos of the truck showing up.
This was the president you were talking about that tweet stuff and makes announcements? Is this the one that you're talking about?
Well, in a wartime, you can do, that's kind of good, right? And there's some wartime situations where you might want to cut around all that red tape, right? And for a while, some of us weren't sure whether or not they actually had the ground stations to cover it. But they don't have any in Ukraine that I'm aware of, but they have some nearby that is good enough, right? Just kind of has to be basically field of view to be able to do it. So now they're provided that. Well, what does Starlink do, right? Starlink provides internet access, and so for us, maybe that means we can go watch Netflix, or we can play online games or something or whatever. For Ukrainians, it's important because there have been disruptions to the Ukrainian internet. Now, it's not, the Russians didn't take it totally out. In fact, one of the early Ukrainian engineers that was testing out the service concluded his thing by saying, well, I'm actually going to still use my fiber because it works really well and it's still up. And I kind of broke my dish, right? I think he had a completely hacked apart dish that wasn't doing so good. So for some people, they can still get landline internet in Ukraine, but for others, this is a great option, right? This is going to work. So long way to get around to your other question, the military. Well, remember in the beginning I said that there were some reports that Ukrainian government had access to Viasat, right, which would have done something similar using satellites in geo orbit as opposed to satellites in LEO. Uh, and really, it's you've got military forces dispersed around the country. How do they communicate? Is the really big question. Now, I don't think that you're it's hard for me to think that for example, they're flying UAVs directly off of that because the UAVs probably have a Wi-Fi connection, right? And that means they have to be within Wi-Fi range of a terminal of a Starlink terminal. That doesn't make a lot of sense. What I have heard is they're using it maybe to connect the people looking at the satellite imagery and doing the targeting to kind of connect them to the people that are flying UAVs or doing targeting. So that to me sounds more plausible. Again, there's not a lot of public details on this. There's probably stuff going on we don't know because, again, the middle of a war zone, right? And obviously the Ukrainians are not going to give away, all of their tactics and all of their ops. But I think it's safe to say it is having an impact. And, to the comment one of you guys made earlier about, this is sort of a whole new thing. We've had commercial space before, and it's been used in conflicts before, but not to this level and not this sort of ubiquitous kind of access, right? The amount of satellite imagery that's on everyone's front page about what's happening is just, it's incredible.
Yeah,
right?
out of control.
And,
right? Like it's so much, yeah.
Well, right. And, pretty much most people can pick up their smartphone and they can order 30-centimeter imagery of pretty much anywhere they want. That's amazing, right?
Yeah.
5-10 years ago, you had to be a national government with a lot of money in order to do that. And now most people can do that. That's pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It does make me think, though, that, is the utility of that making... I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this properly, but when the U.S. government talks about we need to create these proliferated constellations, I feel like 5-10 years ago when that was a thing that people would start talking about, it was phrased in a way that it was
still
like...
should be a thing.
Oh, absolutely. But my point was that, when they started talking about it, I think they were thinking, our current capabilities in a huge constellation. We need 300 keyhole spy satellites or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any bit of a shifting focus there that maybe we don't need 10-centimeter constellations, but 30 will do fine? Is there any calculation going on internally there about that?
I really hope, given how much my taxpayer money they're spending.
Exactly.
So this
we got a couple PPP dollars left. I saw you tweeting about the PPP
right.
program earlier, but
this is one of the problems with this notion of resilience is people keep saying, "Oh, well, that doesn't work for my application or my constellation." When you talk about resilience, you're really talking about a basket of different solutions. Maybe it's lots of small satellites, right? We call distributed constellations. Maybe it's taking one big satellite does 5 things and splitting that up among 5 different satellites. Just we call disaggregation. Maybe it's putting satellites in different orbits, some in LEO, some in GEO, some in MEO, right? That makes it more difficult. Maybe it's a mix of government and commercial. Maybe it's a mix of space and terrestrial, right? So maybe there's non-terrestrial solutions. The point is to look at all these different options and come up with what makes sense for that particular capability, because there's some that it's really hard to get away from it. You keep talking about the spy satellites, right? There's a limit. There's a physics limit of how big your optic needs to be in order to get a certain ground resolution at a certain distance. And theoretically, yeah, you can do a lot of you can do some virtual interferometry. You can have multiple little ones you put together, but that's really hard to do. You need to know where they are very, very, very precisely to do that. So if you want to get really great images, you kind of got to have a big piece of glass. So we're not saying replace those entirely. We're saying maybe don't use only those, right? Combine Planet plus those plus the higher resolution 30 centimeter Maxar stuff, and now you've got a lot more options. And plus, there's not only visible, there's infrared, there's ultraviolet, there's hyperspectral, there's radar imagery, SAR. There's ELINT, so electronic intelligence, right? So what Hawkeye is doing, where they're actually just sensing the electronic signals being emitted. And so they can say, oh, look, there's somebody over there who's got a Wi-Fi hotspot. Or, oh, look, over there, there's somebody who's, got a, some sort of a 5G connection. Or, oh, look, right there, there's a GPS jammer right there, right? All of that stuff is now possible in a commercial sense. And that's really, really different.
Yeah, it strikes me as really. So this is what I was telling Anthony, is that like I really feel like space and military is like having a moment, right? Because like this feels like one of the most like high tech conflicts that we've seen in a long time. Like where we're getting all it's not just the satellite images of the pontoon destruction we saw, or the ships getting destroyed, or seeing all the columns of tanks and like almost real time basically. But we also have this sort of internet connected live stream of it, like there's like Ukrainians on TikTok being like, here's how you hijack a tank, and like boom, up it goes through Starlink.
And the whole Ukrainian farmer meme, right? The Ukrainian farmer, they want a tank, right? They've all got tanks now. It's crazy.
Exactly. Like here, look what I found in my yard, a broken tank. Let's go inside and pull the levers and see what happens. It's live stream, right? And then you also have all this like really crazy intelligence sharing that's happening. So like we're seeing, like we're almost able to visualize in real time of like, here's a picture from a PlanetSat that goes out to here, and then the government is combining their knowledge, and then off it goes to Ukrainians, and then boom, a ship gets blown up, and you're just like, wow, like this is happening. Like this is like neurons firing in a brain.
Yeah.
Like, just
or the other direction, right? Where we see photos of Bucha on the ground, and then they're like, oh, it was fake, and then was it the New York Times that did that whole piece where they literally used satellite imagery to be like, nope, these are the bodies that were in that footage, here they are. And like,
isn't that crazy?
It's such a wild, like both directions are wild. Oh, the 40-mile convoy. Yeah. Oh, here it is, on TikTok. Here, the bodies on the ground. Here they are from space. It's a new era, and it makes you think like how different this would have been 5 years ago.
So I completely agree.
Especially if TikTok got banned. If that whole thing where Trump was going to ban TikTok, man, we would have never known about the tank. We'd never known about the farmer tank.
Everybody else would have known about it, right?
Yeah,
we would have been fine. It's just not here in America.
We would have been getting Starlink and using Starlink to route around and get TikTok things of farmers getting stealing tanks.
It doesn't work that way because Starlink's got to get that license from the government, right?
Yeah,
so right.
It's okay. All the good TikToks make it to.
Elon would have bought TikTok instead, and then he would have pumped it right into Starlink.
But also, you're right. It does feel like a very tech war, and I think a lot of that has to do with the social media kind of connectivity side of it. Mm-hmm. But also keep in mind, a lot of the weapons they're used are old weapons.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like the Stingers. They were talking about how they're trying to make more of them, but they use a bunch of obsolete ICs, and now they're like, do we redesign the whole thing to use modern computer chips and components, or do we just try and keep buying old ones off eBay so we can make more Stingers? That's kind of crazy. That the Stingers and the Javelins and even all the tanks that are there. I mean, that's 20, 30-year-old technology. Now it seems modern, maybe because sort of our public vision of some of this is World War II, maybe, I guess. I don't know. So maybe that's a little why it seems so modern. But some of this is not all that modern. And to me, that's something else. I look at all the hype going on about, AI and quantum this and quantum that and hypersonics and stuff. I'm like, man, look what you can do with a commercial drone and a cell phone camera and, some high explosives. right? You can actually do some really cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
we're spending all this
if
time.
you give a shit, it really matters.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? And yet we're spending a huge amount of time and a lot of taxpayer money on all this extremely complicated kind of, chasing the front end of the curve technology. And I don't know, part of me is just like, is that really going to be worth it? Or are we just kind of, chasing what the latest hypey thing is, right?
Well, and in a way, I kind of see that as like analogous to what happened in the World War I and World War II. So, if you think about weapons development through the 80s, 90s, 2000s, when there wasn't like this huge space thing, they had to be like self-sufficient weapons. Like you had to be able to get one device in your hand that could target something far away, fire the missile, use its own guidance and find its way and hit that thing. So it had to be this super complex thing, right? But now that all this other cheap space tech is coming in, you can literally just have two guys who fly the drone over the car with a hand grenade topped to it, blow a little clip and it falls in the window and they take out like like this. So the human body has not changed in thousands of years. It's still just as easy to kill a guy now as it was 5,000 years ago, but it's just easier to find them now, right?
If you pitched that idea as an acquisitions contract, right? So the military's got like a requirement. We got to go kill some tanks, and you're like, hey, here we're gonna go buy some like DJI drones, and we're gonna duct tape, some high explosives at the bottom, and fly overhead and drop them on there. You get laughed out of the building, right? They're like, oh, that'll never work. It's stupid. We're going to buy this, $1 billion a round thing that comes from, this the defense contractor over there. That's sort of what I'm getting at.
I want to be clear. We are independent podcasters. So if we were good at selling this to the military, we would probably not be independent podcasters.
But hold on though, let me. I agree with you. Let me take that analogy further though, right? If you had told someone in World War II that they need to stop buying the big fancy battleships, they also would have laughed you out of the room, right? If you're like, no, just build 100,000 cheap shitty planes and it'll be just fine, right? Like, and that's a game changer, right? Yeah. So is this the sort of thing that's happening where this like interconnectivity, is that the new aircraft carrier that is like completely making a whole bunch of weaponry obsolete?
Yeah, I honestly don't know, right? Because that's kind of what we did in World War II, right? Pound for pound, some of the German, Leopard tanks and some of the other stuff was superior, but we were cranking out 10,000 fighters a week, right? Yeah. And we were just drowning them in pure numbers.
We were DDoSing them with B-17s or whatever.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of that there, and also I think we forget today just how ancient some of that technology was, right? So if you go like to an air show or something museum. My favorite museum here in the DC area is actually the Udvar Hazy extension to the Air and Space Museum. Oh, yeah. It's just got huge hangar just full of all kinds of planes and a space shuttle and stuff. But it's just metal and like cables, right, covered in canvas and maybe some wood, and it's all literally fly by wire. As in, I pull this right, and the little cable moves, and that tugs the ailerons. It's extremely low technology. Just the notion you had a radio, that was high tech. That was like cutting edge stuff at the time. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. Anyways, but back to your point, it is a different kind of a situation going the war for us to be able to see it, and also just kind of how it's been evolving. And also, to what we talked about earlier, this is the first time that I can think of where there's been an armed conflict where at least one of the combatants had the ability to kind of shoot back against space. The Russians have some pretty sophisticated counterspace, and as we said earlier, we're seeing them do the cyber, we're seeing them, use some of the electronic warfare, but that's about it. And that's going to raise a whole bunch of questions and lots of kind of papers and articles and debates afterwards of kind of why, right? Were they deterred from doing it? Maybe it's not as effective. Maybe they decided not to. Maybe they said, well, we have to use that stuff ourselves, so maybe we don't want to, destroy it all. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Do you think that shifts, to bring it all the way full circle, a lot of the positioning around the bans on anti-satellite weaponry is this chess game with China and Russia to be like, well, they're floating this ban that is like a ban around stuff that nobody's really interested in, and we're banning the stuff they are interested in. Do you think that seeing it on this scale might, and maybe less so with Russia because it's a whole different situation with them, but when we go and talk to China about this kind of stuff now, and we can point to this example as like, those weapons aren't useful, Russia didn't use them at all, they had them and they didn't use them. Does that come into to what's going on in those rooms where they're negotiating?
Yeah, it's a big question. So, just to kind of fill in what he's getting at, right, is I've talked about a couple of times. At this week, there's a meeting in Geneva of lots of different countries, something called an open-ended working group, and the open-endedness refers to any country that wants to participate can. So there's a lot of countries there. And they're talking about space threats. What do we do about space threats? What are, what should the world do about those? And the reason this debate is hard is because there's no agreement really on what the problem is. As you hinted at, you've got sort of, the US and most of the West are focused on threats to satellites, space weapons, missiles being launched up, destroying satellites, as the big problem we need to deal with. Russia and China, however, are more focused on things in space that can threaten things here on Earth. So space-based missile defense, the Star Wars dream that Reagan had, maybe some other types of, rods from God, kind of, the theorized weapons of space to Earth. That's what they're focused on. And there's also another axis here, which is, should we be looking to put in place kind of, norms of behavior, voluntary measures, or should we be going for a legally binding treaty? And there's differences among those things. So that's the debate happening right now between all these different countries is, where's the majority going to fall? Is it on the threats to space systems, the threats from space? Is it for a legally binding solution? Is it for some, voluntary norms and stuff? And at this point, it's kind of hard to see. I've got a couple of colleagues that are over there that are participating. They actually let some of us civil society NGOs participate and make statements, which I think was really good, because that's not always allowed in some of the official multilateral discussions. This meeting is happening this week. It's going to happen again later this year, and they're supposed to meet a couple of times next year and then provide a report to the UN. So this topic is not going away anywhere anytime soon. But at the same time, this is the first time we've had these formal discussions in 10 years, something like that. So it is kind of a real opportunity to actually, try and do something.
Is there something about, say the last 2 years that is like, is there something that's maybe like shocked you or surprised you about like, the use of space in the military and conflicts and all this kind of things? Like, what's like really got you like, not necessarily concerned, but like, wow, I need to learn more about this because I did not see this coming.
So it wasn't for me in the last couple of years. This is sort of my profession, right? I've been doing this for quite a while, and I was in the U.S. Air Force for 9 years, working both nuclear weapons and then working space situation awareness. So I was part of the unit that tracks all this stuff when it used to be located in Cheyenne Mountain. We did have a shift around 2014. There was a significant shift, at least here in the U.S., where that was when we started to see people in the U.S. government, people in the U.S. military start talking about space being a warfighting domain. And the thing we saw at that point was, I kind of got it because I'm one of these nerds that studied this stuff, and we're kind of deep in a lot of it. But a lot of the information was classified, right? A lot of it was happening behind closed doors, and so people would say, "Oh, if only you could, get a clearance and go over to the SCIF, you could see what the real problems were, right? And just how bad things were." And we felt that was suboptimal for something that has a potential to impact all of us, because we all use space, right? So that's why we started our Counterspace report, was to see what information could we find in the open source, in the public domain, about what these different countries are doing. And can we put that together? Can we put that out there to then inform a more public debate about what we should do about this? And it's been kind of a long 4 years to get to that point. I think we've made a positive impact in that. We do have occasionally governments sort of saying, well, we can't really talk about it, but maybe go read this document, kind of a thing, right? So I think that's helpful. So for me, it was more of kind of helping others understand this, right? That was sort of what I was trying to get at. There's occasionally, cool stuff that happens. I should say cool. Again, as an orbital mechanics nerd, right? And kind of this stuff, and you're like,
you're in the right circle to say cool in this case. Yes.
So for example, back in January, China launched a satellite, the SJ-21, that went into a geotransfer orbit and then moved out to the geobelt, rendezvoused with a dead Beidou satellite, and then towed it to the satellite graveyard. That was kind of cool, right? I mean, first, so when they launched it, they said it was going to be doing orbital debris mitigation, and everyone sort of didn't really pay attention to what that meant. Although we should have, because it launched into a 7-degree inclined geotransfer orbit, which is not the normal inclination for a geo, but it did line up with the inclination of this dead satellite. And they went up and grabbed it and towed it to geo. And I mean, that's the first time a government's done that, right? And, kind of signals that maybe they wanted to get rid of it. Now, maybe they also wanted to demonstrate the ability to do that. And there's a whole lot of dual use implications of that kind of technology. But that is sort of the cutting edge of space, right? What we'll call satellite servicing, the ability to get close and repair, refuel, inspect, assemble, swap out components, tow to a different orbit. That is the cutting edge of where space stuff is, and there's a huge amount of promise in that.
Okay. I got lots of people.
You got a lot of reading. Shake's like, oh my god.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, this is. I'm really glad we had this conversation, because it just feels like, I don't know. It really feels like it's new, and there's people outside of my space group that are like, wow, like I can't believe we saw this picture of it. Like, they're noticing the impact, like right in the.
Oh yeah. Right. And I'm kind of blasé about this because, again, this is what I do. This is what I study. But you're absolutely right.
Even one of the like the political issues right now in Canada is, well, I mean, obviously it's all about NATO spending and increasing, that's kind of like normal across the board for any NATO country right now, is talking about military expenditures. But like big thing on the table right now is NORAD, and like, is Canada doing its part in contributing to NORAD, and are we working well with the United States to look for these threats? And like I heard that on like the CBC's like mainstream podcast. They're talking about missile defense. I was like, wow,
what is this, 1960?
Yeah, like NORAD. And it was funny because they had the American ambassador on, and he was talking, and he's just like, so let's talk about NORAD. And I know that most of your listeners probably, when they hear NORAD, they think about, is that the group that tracks Santa Claus?
Totally.
Then, yes, it is. Yes, but they actually do more than that, right? And so I thought that was like
they're actually formed to track a little bit more dangerous thing, right?
If
Soviet bombers and
ICBMs
coming over the pole.
Santa Claus does move a little faster though, so if you can do Santa Claus,
it's like he's hypersonic. It's really funny.
He's hypersonic.
Yeah,
he's definitely hypersonic.
Hyperspace.
No, but you're right, and
hypersonics.
And also that's interesting because we had this whole thing for 20 years, right? It's all about terrorism, counterterrorism, terrorism, right? We kind of forgot about that. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's all about China. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, right? Yeah. Russia's still a thing, right? It's like, whoa, hold on here.
Bring out the old playbook.
Back up a second, right?
Where's Top Gun 2 at? Is still time to like make it Russia again? Do we have to make it China this time or what?
Wait, isn't that coming out in a week or two?
2 weeks, Memorial Day weekend, I think. Finally, I might go back to the movie theater for Top Gun 2. I'm gonna be pretty pumped.
But that's where my wife and I met, right? So I got stationed in Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs in the early 2000s. My wife was a major in the Canadian Forces, and we both got stationed in the same unit there together because we were both working for NORAD at the time. And yeah,
I was 100% sure you met your wife at Top Gun, like original Top Gun. 100% sure that's where that story was going.
Yeah, that might be a totally different kind of story, right? Yeah, no. We're both space nerds. We met inside a mountain. It's great. But it's because there are still people to this day in Colorado Springs who are watching 24/7 for potential Russian and now Chinese missiles coming up over the North Pole, presenting a threat to the U.S. and Canada, more the U.S. than Canada. But I mean, was that old joke about how Canada's just there to kind of absorb the ones that fall short, right?
Yeah, we have already done that. We've already fulfilled that duty,
right?
though. Okay.
Yep. It's a great service. Yeah. Mexico takes the comet impacts. Canada takes the space debris and the ballistic missiles.
It's a partnership, right?
Comet impacts. Oh man.
Directly on Jake's house at the moment.
Oh my goodness.
Brian, you mentioned the counter space report a couple of times. Is there? I just pulled up the executive summary on this sucker, and it says 04/2022. So is this like frequently updated, or was this a very recent official release?
Annually. We've been doing it annually since 2018, because it's if you get one in person. And we do have some that are amazing looking. It's up over 200 pages. That's a beefy volume, right? It's kind of challenging for us to take them anywhere because they've gotten so big. So we do it annually, and we put it out both electronically and in print. We also translate the executive summary into Russian, Chinese, French, and Spanish, mainly because we want the countries that are talking about this stuff to have access to this kind of information, right? To help inform their discussions. The other thing I'll point out that your listeners might be interested in is if you go to the website there's a link to some YouTube videos that show animated Gabbard plots for a whole bunch of destructive ASAT tests. A Gabbard plot is a way of graphing the spread of debris objects that are created from an incident. You simply just plot the apogee and the perigee, right? And what we had somebody that went through and did that, and then for every point in time, and then we animated them. So you can see, this satellite was destroyed at this altitude, and boom, here's this spread of debris that goes up pretty high in apogee from the initial impact, and then slowly comes down over time as it decays out of the atmosphere. And part of the reason we did that was to drive home that there's no such thing as a responsible anti-satellite test. We joked earlier about the one that the U.S. did back in 2008, right? So we whacked one of our dead NRO satellites at an altitude of about 220 kilometers. And the public explanation was that it was full of frozen hydrazine, which is really bad stuff, and they were afraid that the hydrazine would survive re-entry and then pose a threat to somebody on the ground. So we hit it with a missile from a ship. But there was debris
Mission
that got
accomplished.
thrown. Right. Mission accomplished, right? So the intercept happened about 225, but there was debris that got thrown more than 1,500 kilometers in apogee. And it took 1.5 years for all that to come back down. And you can see on here the big colored dots, those represent the International Space Station. They represent the Starlink constellation. They represent the Chinese Tiangong Space Station. And so all this stuff is going to get thrown up past all that human spaceflight stuff at 400 kilometers, the large constellations hanging at around 400 or 500 kilometers and other altitudes. That's why, there's sort of this push to make this stuff, kind of outlaw this stuff, because even at low altitude, you're going to throw debris high, and it's going to pose a problem for everybody.
And of course, these plots named for Tulsi Gabbard. Just No,
No.
different.
Different one. Yeah.
A NASA scientist who first came up with this as a way to show, and usually they're static. This is sort of a newer invention, is animating them, but to show sort of the spread of a debris field. So you usually get like this plus sign kind of a look to it, sort of with the origin at where the intercept happened, and it kind of spreads out in perigee, and it spreads out in apogee and spreads out in perigee.
Some cool stuff. It's Jonathan McDowell's. That's what he dreams about. Just
John's a global treasure.
that is a true fact.
Literally, he has the best catalog of stuff in space, better than any government. He has the best one.
We did a whole episode on his lists. Don't worry.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, he just wants to make a list.
Project, right?
Just wants to finish his
he's
goddamn
writing
list.
Books. No, his life's project is a book of every object humans have put into space.
Yeah.
Which is kind of hard, right?
The book never ends.
And he's starting with like the V2 experiments, right?
That's crazy. Boy.
Oh man.
Brian, where should people follow along with you if they are not partaking at the moment?
Well, a few different places. I mean, you can stop by our website, swfound.org, which you've been shown periodically. That's where we have all of our work stuff, and my foundation, Secure World. Our focus is the long-term sustainable use of space for benefits here on Earth. So we care about things like orbital debris and congestion and satellite testing and all space traffic management, all that kind of stuff to try and make sure we can use space for all these great benefits. So you can get all kind of the stuffy formal stuff there. I'm pretty active on social media, both Twitter and LinkedIn. So if you want to follow me at Brian Weeden. It's not just space stuff, fair warning, right? I kind of talk about all the stuff I find interesting and cool. But happy to answer questions or kind of, follow up any stuff we think about here. So those are the two main areas to kind of follow up on what I'm up to and these topics in general. And there's a whole community of people working on this issue on Twitter. From multiple countries. There's policy nerds, there's legal nerds, there's actual nerds, right? It's a pretty interesting group.
Actual nerds, yeah.
As in the people that do orbital calculations in their head and stuff, right? And think Kerbал's easy.
Yeah. The rich Parnells of the world, right? So, yeah.
Jake, are you taking a sabbatical after your Casey Dreyer week that happened?
Maybe just a shorty.
Great.
Yeah. No, I had Casey on to talk about the planetary decadal survey, and it was a gauntlet. It was a long conversation, so it was a lot of airtime. So yeah, I'm taking maybe just one extra week from what I would normally post. But I should be digging into some more follow-on stuff from the decadal, getting deeper into some of the specific areas, whether destinations or missions. So keep an eye on the We Martians feed for that. I'm pretty excited for that. Anthony, what are you working on?
I've got a topical one tomorrow. I'm going to be talking to Mike Gold about the Artemis Accords. So this is very relevant to what we're talking about here.
Make sure you ask him why they're called Accords.
I wasn't going to ask you about the Accords part. I was going to really harp on the Artemis part because I felt that was a really high risk, high reward scenario for that. But I'm definitely going to ask about both Artemis and Accords.
Ask him why they're called the Accords.
I'm pumped because he convinced Eric Berger to send me an email to get him on Miko, and so I'm like, all right, this is going to be great.
Mike's a friend of mine. Mike's a great guy, he deserves a ton of credit for the success of the Artemis Accords, but make sure you ask him why they're called
the Accords. All right, sweet. You're gonna hear that probably Monday, I guess. Monday on the main engine cutoff feed is where I'm gonna put that. So that's a little teaser that Brian's gonna.
All right.
Maybe I'll call you while we're talking, and you can give him some crap about the Accords part or something. But.
No, I think it's good. It's great. It's a cool story.
Jake, next, what are you doing on Off-Nominal next week? Because I'm not gonna be here.
Yeah, it's next week you're away. So I have a guest host joining me. So if you remember Anna from the But It Is Rocket Science podcast, she's going to be popping in to help me, and we're going to be interviewing Dr. Pamela Gay, who is an astronomer, and she's from she does the very popular and long-running Astronomy Cast podcast with Fraser Kane. So we're going to talk a little bit about astronomy and making space podcasts and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm pretty excited for
Another really light news topic this week when you have people focused on astronomy on. No news about that.
There's going to be probably some black hole talk, or Sagittarius A, right? That's the one. So another episode way out of my depth, by the way.
Totally. Yeah. You're just going on this voyage of self improvement, I guess. I don't know.
Career broadening.
That's the one. There you go. Jake's other career was making Discord bots. We should mention this. People have been suggesting topics or titles for this episode in Discord.
Yeah. So we rolled out a prototype today of just allowing the listeners in our Discord to catch funny things that we say during the episode and suggest them as an episode title, and that's all collected. It kind of worked. It almost, there's a couple bugs, but it worked pretty well. I'm really surprised that my coding skills worked. But if you want to be a part of that, you should definitely join for a membership in the channel, because that gets you access to the Discord. It's a great bunch of people, and you can pop in there and be a part of the episode naming, which is pretty fun.
All right, everybody. Brian, thanks again for being here. You are the best.
My pleasure.
We'll see y'all later. Bye, everybody.
Bye.